What deep, dark secret did you learn about the seemingly perfect family? I grew up with a girl down the street who lived with her mom and stepdad. Stepdad was pretty cool, according to 7-year-old me. Nice guy. Come to find out, he'd been upping my friend for years. It had been going on so long, had been so normalized to her, that she thought I was doing that with my dad. Our other friend was doing it with her dad. To her, your father figure having sex with you was just something you did. I was too young to know what happened at the time it was discovered. But I do remember my mom asking me if he had ever touched me and her being very concerned he might have hurt me. Was years before I found out what actually happened. When I was a kid I knew a set of twins who were friends with my older sister. The twins, both female, were straight A students and always dressed modestly. Neither girl was allowed to date and their parents owned a huge house with multiple cars and the girls never seemed to want for anything. Anyway, few years later the parents were busted because apparently they owned another house a few streets away, less lavish, and they were running a brothel out of it with girls the same age as their daughters, who were around 18 at this time and both in university. I just found it very ironic that they were so protective over their own daughters but were whoring out other people's daughters. My grandpa knew and grew up with Joseph Mengele. My grandma still denies the experiments that happened in Auschwitz, not the killing, but rather Mengele's role in Auschwitz. Just to note, my grandpa said that he didn't like Mengele, even as kids. Noah brother and sister live together in a huge mansion and both own amazing beautiful cars. Clearly very affluent. One of them began dating a family friend who wasn't so well off. Turns out the reason they're so rich is because their parents were associated with some Italian mafia and were brutally murdered and are-paid in front of them when they were children. They were given a huge inheritance after this event. You would never guess. They look like they've had the easiest life. Edit. Since everyone's asking. The mother was raped, then murdered while her husband watched. Then the husband was murdered. Poor choice of syntax. Well, it is better to cry in a brand new Mercedes than on a shitty old bike. The mum remarried when her kids were quite young to a new perfect stepdad. Roll on 10 years and the 15-year-old daughter notices something in the bathroom while she's showering. Webcam. Via the stepdad. That's not the darkest part though. The darkest part IMHO is that her mum forgave him for filming her 15-year-old daughter in the bath and on the toilet. Told the daughter she would always put her husband first and arranged for her daughter to go and live with her nan. My grandpa on my mom's side had another family on the side. When he died my grandmother's name was put on his gravestone. The other family chiseled it out. Also my oldest aunt on my mom's side isn't blood related. They kept their handicapped son locked up. Most people didn't even know he existed. They made his room like a padded cell and just left him in bed all the time with a nurse coming to bathe, feed and rotate him. His parents didn't even talk to him or look at him often. My grandfather lives in Tennessee by himself, kind of out in the mountains. Well, there is a family cemetery in his backyard up this 50-yard long hill that's covered in thick trees. There's a dude in our family buried up there along with his 9 dead children and 4 dead wives who all died at pretty young ages. All of the women he married died around 3-5 years after they got married. This was back in the mid to late 1800s and I guess the guy was known to be real shady. Still unknown if he played a part in all the deaths or if he is just a super unlucky man. I met my friend's grandparents and they are your typical kind of white doily toting American grandparents. They literally have the cutest old people house in the world and they're extremely friendly. Turns out for a time in the 60s or 70s they were in a sex cult. It's an open secret that my friend's uncle is actually the child of the grandmother and the cult leader. There are the ones about my family I've told before. We aren't perfect. But things like attempted axe murdering grandfather are pretty crazy secrets. But as a kid I hung out with a dude who was part of a perfect family it seemed. His mom was an Olympic rower and his dad was some super cool business exec. We were good friends from like 12-14 or so. Then different school. I found out his mom died of cancer like the year later. Was very sad. Then the next year, it came to light the dad was sexually abusing him and his two little sisters. And had been maybe forever. He went to jail for that. It was one of those floor falling out of the world things. Poor guy. I have a very small family of about 7 people. Growing up, everyone would get together for events and everything seemed pretty normal and everyone seemed to get along. It wasn't until I was a teenager that I noticed that everyone in my family actually hates the shit out of each other, and it was just some huge contest to see who had become the better person over the years. My mother and my grandmother are the only ones who talk to each other. And it's probably only because they live together. My grandmother and grandfather are separated. And my grandmother only calls him every few months to see if he's dead or not. Ring. Hello? Men? Still alive? Throwaway time. My grandmother is directly related to Kim Il-sung. She performed as a kindergartner in front of him. Her family ran away to South Korea when the war began. And she grew up relatively poor. My parents were in a cult for years that worshipped chaos magic. When I was in the hospital recovering from pneumonia, I hallucinated for 2 weeks. I don't remember the first few days of it. But a friend swears that he came to visit me and I was babbling on about different kinds of magic and one of them was chaos magic. An ex-fiancé also told me that not only do I snore in my sleep, but I do this spooking mumbling thing where it sounds like I'm trying to cast spells. I'm kind of annoyed that I can't fully access my magical powers. Given that I was pretty young at the time, I probably missed some warning signs. A good friend of mine was being pretty seriously abused by his mother and I had no idea. He was the class clown and always seemed happy. We would hang out at each other's houses after school and play on the weekends. I never had a weird experience with his mother. Years later, he stabbed his mother to death in her sleep. I have yet to prove that the family next door is in witness protection or a spy family. I'm on to you, John. On my mother's side, I have an aunt who decided to steal money from a charity to rebuild a guy's house that recently burned down. It was a small town, so all they had was a bin for dollar bills at the local bar. She took all of it and the next day had some expensive new shoes. And on my dad's side, my grandfather was some weasel face con man who cheated at church, celebrities, and politicians so he could live without working. But one day he and one of the largest sport memorabilia collections on earth disappeared. He apparently was killed in a mob hit. On my mother's side, I have an aunt who decided to steal money from a charity to rebuild a guy's house that recently burned down. I read this as she stole from one charity in order to help out a different cause and thought, well, that's not so bad. Whoops. They're deep in debt. Nobody must know. I have a cousin out there that my whole family has never met. My grandparents were the nicest people, but apparently my aunt got pregnant as a teen and they sent her away to have the baby and give up for adoption. I believe this would have been sometime in the 60s or even late 50s given her age. One of my parents told me this a while ago once and I've never heard anyone in my whole family ever mention anything about it other than that one time. My father was a pastor who cheated on his wife, my mother, while she was undergoing chemotherapy. So there's that. Edit. Just to be clear, he was very manipulative and abusive behind closed doors, so that's why we were a seemingly perfect family. We don't have any relationship with him anymore and we intend to keep it that way. Pretty sure he's homeless now, and I heavily disagree with you if you think there's any justification for abandoning the person who needs you the most when they're at their weakest and lowest point. Kindly FCK off if you wanna convince me what he did wasn't that bad. Because you weren't there. And please don't recommend any Eminem song to me. Lived in Georgia for about a year while my dad was stationed in Fort Benning. Started freshman year of high school and met a really cool girl that I maintained a pretty good friendship with. She was an only child. And her parents were some of the most devout Catholics I'd ever met, even my dad. Raised Catholic and maintained his faith through his adulthood. Didn't really compare. Pretty normal family setting for them. But I moved away after a year because dad retired from the army. Closer towards when I left, I went over to visit and walked into the front door to see her mom getting spit roasted in the middle of their living room. Her husband wasn't even home. That they were actually perfect. Honestly, I've learned a lot of deep, dark secrets about a lot of families. What freaked me out the most was learning that an actual Leave It to Beaver type family could exist. Took me years to learn how to deal with it. Check the grandfather clock. There's a secret entrance to our pay dungeon in that house somewhere. My uncle had a kid with some lady and his family does not know, but is almost common knowledge in his side of the family. She was sleeping with his brother. At 60 she divorced him and married the brother. The most shocking part is that all three eventually ended up back on friendly terms and were invited to the next 3 weddings of the husband. The wife and brother did not live to see the 4th. On the next Arrested Development. Perfect kids. Perfect husband and wife. Respected members of the community as the dad was a doctor. Partnered with another similarly respected doctor in the town. A few years later a polite notice appeared in the newspaper that they were ending their partnership. Nobody batted an eyelid. Things continued as normal. Fast forward about 20 years later, and I find one of the daughters on Facebook. We went to school together and I happened to be a patient of the dad, so I asked how he was doing. Dad is estranged from the family. That practice they partnered with? He was having an affair with the wife and they ran off. That's why they ended it. But to save face they just made it seem like a professional split and he retired. Very few people know the true story. Not so much deep and dark, but old school agricultural family. The daughters are just discarded. You're your husband's responsibility now. The sons are given everything. My f-king brother is a pedophile and only the people from my immediate family know about what he did, so he always gets invited to family reunions by aunts and cousins because they don't know what he did. I'm pressured to keep my mouth shut about it and not cause problems, but it seriously scares me thinking about him being around all my little nibblings and little cousins. Hate that asshole. I thought my family was perfect until my grandma passed away in 1998. I found out my grandma was kind of abusive towards my mom. Grandma accused my mom of sleeping with my grandpa, mom's stepdad. Grandpa cheated on my grandma numerous times. Grandpa used to make my mom watch him masturbate when she was 5 years old. When she finally told grandma blamed her, mom, for his actions. It's not the worst secret ever, but my mother still keeps in touch with her first boyfriend. The family of her ex are a perfect family from an outsider's view. And I have assumed this to be true for the last 35 years. They are also polite and welcoming. I recently learned that the woman my mother's ex married beat the children until they were 18. And that the 2 daughters hate each other. When the daughters are out socially they put on the front of a perfect family unit and pretend to get on well. Not that shocking. Not something that plagues the family, but I have an ancestor that was mutilated on the high seas. Shti bro. I hope things are going better now. My friends seem to have the perfect marriage and a newborn to take care of. Both parents are very involved and loving. The husband confessed to me that right before their son was born, his wife came out as a lesbian to him and confessed that she was in love with her best female friend. However, because their family is religious and would never accept her, she agreed to stay married to him and keep up appearances for the sake of their child. They barely talk in private, but in public they are the perfect loving young family. This is heartbreaking. It's also unsustainable. Wealthy Mormon family. The dad was high up and very active in the church. He was in some sort of investment banking. And with how the Mormon community can be, as far as creating business with each other, many affluent families in the area invested with him because he always got such good returns. Fast forward to the markets crashing. Turns out he had been running a Ponzi scheme on anybody with money in the area. I want to say it was about 50 million just from our small conservative community of 70,000 or so. He ditched his family, wife and a few children, and fled the country. While they had to move in with her folks in another state. That was a pretty big deal. They all have DUIs. Literally. Mom, dad, 3 daughters, and son. All have DUIs. A couple of them have more than 3+. I dated the middle daughter for many years and they always made me feel lesser for being in the military and not going to college right away. Always had a holier than thou attitude. Then I had to pick up her brother from jail from his second DUI in 5 years and learned of the family history. He didn't seem to think a second DUI was an issue and went on to tell me about each one his family members had. I was stunned. Breaking up with her sucked. But I was relieved to be away from that family. My grandma has a daughter that she gave up for adoption when she was 20. This wasn't a secret, though. And my mom discovered that she'd been trying to find this daughter shortly before she died. My mom wasn't sure how to go about finding her and wasn't sure if she even wanted to be found. So the search ended there. Well, a couple months ago they connected on 23andMe and my mom immediately called her dad to tell him the news. Here's how the conversation went. Mom, dad, you know how 23andMe connects you to relatives? Grandpa. Yes. Mom. Well, it just connected me to a half sibling. Grandpa, stuttering and quite flustered. Well, we don't know for sure if that's true or not. Mom. Dad, I'm talking about the baby mom gave up before she met you. Grandpa. Oh. Right. My mom tried to pry information about what he thought she was talking about. But he didn't budge. So, my mom may have another unknown half-sibling out there somewhere. Fun stuff. There was this one family we knew. Kids were adorable and the best behaved kids we knew. Husband was a dynamic, intelligent, attractive personality that made everyone feel great about themselves. He had this way of making you feel like you were the coolest, most interesting person in the world whenever you talked to him. Wife was a sweet, gentle lady who clearly loved and adored her kids and husband. This was the type of family everyone wanted. He would go out for dinner with them and remark at how well put together their whole family was and how amazing they are. Then it happened. The wife shows up at our house with the kids and she is crying. Police arrest the husband while he was away from the house briefly. Apparently he had been savagely beating the kids and was a total fear-mongering dictator in the house. Restraining orders issued, divorce court. Custody all granted in favor of the wife. She is now living in a different country. On my dad's side of the family, I have an alcoholic uncle. We never really talk much about him. In fact, I can't remember the last time my dad mentioned his name. But we regularly talk to another alcoholic in the family. And we're on good terms. I learned from my mom that this is because in a fit of drunken rage, before I was born and before dad met mom, my uncle stabbed my dad in the stomach with a large kitchen knife. As a younger kid, I never paid any real attention to the scar. Everything regarding them makes so much sense now. My grandmother's homemade biscuits are actually bulk barn mix. I recently learned that my godmother's father worked for the West German intelligence agency and had an affair with an underage Stasi agent during his stay in East Berlin, while his wife was sitting at home with their infant child. Sounds like a cheesy movie. But unfortunately it's not. My family has a pretty deep history of Nazis. And some were even executed at Nuremberg. One of my dead relatives was a pirate. So yeah. My dad most likely was a pedophile. My mom hooked up with him when he was 19 and she was 13. Then she had me when she was 16. Update. The quiet housewife of the farm family on our rural island near Seattle was actually an undercover FBI agent. My buddy, one of her sons, revealed this to me 60 years later. Everybody knew everybody's business in that small community. But this one evidently fell through the cracks. One girl got pregnant as a teenager. Not an uncommon thing. Unfortunately, It was her older brother, like 10 plus years older, who was the father, and the parents made her abort the child and keep quiet until she left home and never looked back. She put herself through school, got married, and was pregnant again with her daughter. Everything was fine until she got pregnant with another baby and they told her it was a boy. She, in panic, allegedly miscarried, and it all came out about her secret pregnancy. When I talked to her husband, he didn't come out and say it, but I think the notion is that she won't have boys if she has a daughter. I haven't talked to them in 3 years, but I seriously hope she finds some psychological counseling. On the outside we look like a pretty successful family. Plenty of money. Have lived in modernized houses from the mid 1800s. Siblings have had great success at very early ages with huge accomplishments. Older sibling is stressed beyond belief. Their so is in severe crippling depression. I've been through similar things for the past years, but it looks like they have no way out of it. Dad is mentally abusive, which means he has alienated 3 of his children, with the youngest still loving him. The youngest child is mentally unstable and even more abusive than he is. During his and my mom's relationship, he's broken up several times to have sex with some random girl, only to get together with my mom again. They officially announced that they would get divorced a month before getting pregnant with the youngest sibling. Most silent family birthday ever. No one seemed happy another child was on the way. Mom seems completely content with the situation. My cousin is a convicted felon for molesting his 2 nephews. It's never really brought up nowadays, but my aunt insists he's innocent, and that their mom's ex-husband told the kids to say the word touch to get custody. As far as I know, my other cousin, mom to nephews, is no contact with her mom over all of it. I forgot he was in prison until recently when another uncle and my mom were talking about him getting out soon. I was a mistake and the reason they got married. My grandmother is the preachiest person you ever met about being appropriate, having a good family, showing everyone how awesome your family is, etc. My aunt was born 7 months after my grandparents' wedding. My either great or great great grandma had a baby out of wedlock, which her father then killed and buried in a field somewhere. In high school, I learned that the family that lived 3 houses down from me were f-king their children. I learned this when the CPS vans arrived one day during summer. I used to mow their lawn. Also, didn't find this out till years later, but the parents of the class valedictorian and salutatorian were good friends. They were also prolific swingers. This super religious family's daughter starred in a lesbian PRNO. Same family's mother tried to commit suicide and the dad, who is a counselor, ironically, passed it off like she was sinning and confused. They also tried to kidnap their daughter on her wedding day because she was marrying a man before asking her siblings for permission. Our family was that family. Turn out my dad was grooming underage girls. My cousin is a rapist. A couple years ago, when I joined the army, I had to go on security check by NATO alliance. So one day I get a call from intelligence officer. I get in his office, and he asked me who is Jim. I changed a name for this post. I say I don't know, never here for him. He asked who is John, never heard of him either. He says okay. That's all. So I call my mother because last name is my mother maiden name. And she says to me, well, Jim is your grandfather and John is your grandfather's brother. And why are they important? Well, Jim was a high officer in Hitler's ministry. He was a deputy or something of a Ministry of Education, and his elder son John was a high officer in some American concentration camp. And he managed to escape to Argentina, Australia. My grandfather was too young to join SS at that time. And when the war was over he changed his last name. Well, it was quite a shock. My high school best friend's family was seemingly perfect from the outside. The mom was a teacher at our high school and the dad worked at a prison. They went to football games, took me out to eat with them, did normal family things. Turns out that the dad had an affair with a woman whose son both my best friend and I were friends with. The mom found out about the affair through women at the hair salon. The mom and dad stayed together for the kids. No physical relationship. Well, the mom ended up having an affair with a student at our high school. She got sent to prison and the dad became more open about being an alcoholic. I didn't find all of this out until the time the mom was arrested. That they were our money launderers. Small family owned business. With connections to some big time players from the cartels. I like that new Netflix series as well.